All right, Renee, would not be a 24-hour news cycle without some last-minute additions. It looks like we have an official Supreme Court nomination with Amy Coney Barrett being confirmed last night in the Rose Garden by Judge Clarence Thomas.
I know I say this all the time, but I'm often disappointed, but definitely never surprised. It looks like she'll begin her Supreme Court tenure 1 week before Election Day after a very rushed appointment process.
Yeah, her presence on the court could transform the law in America for generations to come. We'll definitely stay tuned on this story as it develops on what's to come with ACB's appointment. All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Miguel.
And I'm Renee, and we're your hosts. Welcome to Signals in the Noise, daily insights into trends in Florida's narrative landscape.
Signals in the Noise takes a look at news articles, social media content, and other platforms to identify conversations, messages, and stories that reinforce ideas, beliefs, and values that we interact with every day. This allows us to identify the shape and color of how meaning is made in the landscape, which we're all organizing and communicating in. This is what we like to call monitoring the narrative weather, and we're your resident meteorologists keeping track of it.
Yep, each morning we'll take you through the latest, where we cover stories of importance. Then we'll move to Hot Takes, where we look at viral content, and we'll wrap things up with On the Radar, a segment where we talk about real-time stories that we're tracking. With that, let's get right into our first segment, The Latest. So this past weekend, Souls to the Polls aimed to encourage voters of all ages to go straight from church to their polling places. And it was popularly reported on by local media, including the Sun Sentinel, My Panhandle, and News 4 Jax, among many others. News outlets have covered South Florida and the Panhandle, and even though Souls to the Polls also happened in Central Florida, content about the events in the region were lacking. We're also still looking for any election content in rural Florida. Mentions of Souls to the Polls reached their highest peak in conversational volume on Twitter over the weekend, and over the last 30 days have over 10,000 mentions. Celebrities like Common showed up to get out the vote, and I even saw Uncle Luke at one of Orlando's GOTV events. That's truly peak Florida right there.
I love how celebrities are getting involved. The stars, they're just like us. Other elected officials were also at Souls to the Polls, including Remi Eagle-Glant and Mary Ellen Wheeler in Alachua County and Cindy Benyai in Southwest Florida. Oh, and QAnon supporter and congressional candidate Laura Loomer was also there apparently. But I guess no one there knew her well enough to press her about, I don't know, her role in Charlottesville or her anti-Black and anti-Muslim tirades. You know what? Let's not talk about her.
I'm just laughing because it seemed like she arrived super early and no one in the crowd knew who she was. It's like getting to a concert early and having to sit through the no-name artists before Beyonce hits the stage. Tragic. I'm going to follow one of my personal faves, Mariah Carey, and tell the world that I don't know her and keep it moving.
While the conversation on Souls to the Poll is generally positive and nonpartisan, we wanted to take a look at how evangelicals and Catholics were contributing to the conversation in case there was any overlap. The overall volume in conversations is pretty low. Most of the conversations held by Catholics were about being disappointed about Amy Coney Barrett being the public face of Catholic women in America and uplifting a progressive Catholic like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as a shining light in the faith community. Other discussions uplifted messages that Catholics do not let their religion dictate their lives and the choices others make, especially around abortion. Conversations by evangelicals centered on attacks against the Lincoln Project, which seems to be a fringe conversation led by QAnoners.
And wherever there's criticism of Trump, QAnon is not far behind with their digital pitchforks. There's also conversations about the Pope apparently saying that Trump is not a Christian, which Catholics are taking as a sign to not vote for him. I don't necessarily blame them either. The Pope denounced, quote, narrow and violent nationalism, xenophobia, and contempt, and even the mistreatment of those who are different, unquote. And only one person comes to mind for me. I don't know about you. This might not work with all audiences, but it will attract moderate and Latinx Catholics who have been persuaded to vote for Biden because of his pro-choice stance.
I can't think of who the Pope might be referring to this close to election. I have no idea. I just know that I grew up in a Latinx Catholic household, and when the Pope talks, we tend to listen. Another story that is picking up steam is an attack on Kamala Harris by the Republican Party of Florida. The mailers criticized the support she's received from the Council of American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, claiming that, quote, in a Biden-Harris administration, anti-Semites will have more than just a seat at the table, they'll have control. This will likely be used by the GOP to influence Jewish and other voters to either vote Trump or not vote at all. The mailer relies on claims of anti-Semitism to denounce anyone who is critical of Israel and the country's racist, violent policies and actions against Palestinians.
I want to flag that the right uses anti-Semitic tropes all the time to make a boogeyman out of George Soros and other Jewish philanthropists funding social movements. They tap into the historic anti-Semitic globalist narratives that have been used to justify all sorts of violence against Jewish people. The right uses anti-Semitism to attack people standing up for justice and then calls the same people anti-Semitic. It's really crazy and can make your head spin.
Yeah, I think you mean globalist in quotes. Well, I mean, also, when you're worried about losing, you resort to fear tactics, right? We can assume, however, their attempt to label Harris as an anti-Semite may work to peel off some Jewish voters completely, though. With that, let's move on to our next segment, Hot Takes. All right, so we know that disinformation is a beast, and we know the right will continue to change the language and their focus from day to day. What doesn't change is the reliance on narratives that center the contention of the future of democracy, right-wing populism, rejection of big government, and uplifting individual freedoms, and the rule of law, to name a few things. From disinformation on the coronavirus to the elections to specific candidates, we can expect that they will only increase the factory of falsehood by using different frames and dog whistles in the week before Election Day. In our episode of Signals in the Noise from yesterday, we mentioned an anti-mask reopen rally happening in South Florida over the weekend. Well, from the intel we've gathered, that small rally is related to a slew of other right-wing conversations happening. Conversations about reopening and Trump's silent majority are both connected with global conspiracy theories under the frames of medical tyranny versus medical freedom, especially when it comes to mask mandates. This is based on the right's beliefs about government's interference in people's personal choices, a narrative string that we've seen all throughout the pandemic by way of reopened protests, anti-maskers, and anti-vaxxers, and it's also a narrative that we have seen moving across issues.
Mm-hmm. And while the overall conversations on the falsehoods and tabloids about Hunter Biden's laptop, we've noticed the resurgence of hashtags WalkAway, Obamagate, and Remember in November. From what we've seen so far, it appears that the Remember in November hashtag is used by both the right and the left nationally, but in Florida, the hashtag appears to be dominated by the MAGA community. Based on research we did over the summer, we noticed that WalkAway has changed their mission from generally supporting the Blexit and Demexit movements, and now they're pushing a more militant approach to the, quote, radical left in their attempts to villainize law enforcement and weaponize tragedies, unquote. Content in these hashtags also includes the right's push to continue to challenge Biden's mental fitness, and yet another likely fabricated article on the Gateway Pundit about Hunter Biden being a pedophile, with what looks like a spoof text attached. Even when false claims are debunked, the stories will still gain traction, as folks on the ground both in Florida and Arizona have reported to us. This text is clearly photoshopped, like Photoshop 101 type Photoshop, which is just not good.
It really is, and I could do a better job, and I'm not even a graphic designer. On the flip side, other conversations in the Remember in November hashtag discuss Trump's failed COVID response, criticizing legislators for not passing COVID relief legislation, and instead focusing on pushing a SCOTUS nomination and casting doubt on the polls because, well, 2016 happened.
Still stressed about that. Mm-hmm. Hashtags every vote counts, Black voters matter, Black votes matter, and free the vote continue to experience peaks and valleys in conversations, persuading others to go out and vote, and sprinkling progressive ideas on governance and voter protection. While hashtags we count on us and count on us FL are generally low, there are continued opportunities to uplift messages, especially if they're connected to higher performing hashtags.
Right. When looking at Reddit, we definitely found conversations in the politics subreddit talking about the Democrats' push to get Puerto Ricans in Florida to outmuscle Cuban Republicans in the state. And in the Miami subreddit, there's general excitement and nervousness about the explosion of voters during early voting. Both subreddits have the connecting thread that emphasizes everyone should vote this year regardless of polling and media coverage, because the higher the turnout, the more close the election will be to the will of the people, and the harder it is to contest the results.
Yep. And just like with the rights framing around freedom and tyranny as it relates to COVID and mask mandates, we see an opportunity to uplift the importance of key life-saving policies like the Affordable Care Act, especially during the pandemic and because open enrollment is right around the corner. With how quickly the media cycle moves, we believe folks who need this information, especially those who've been impacted by unemployment, may miss the opportunity to get their medical coverage they need for themselves and for their loved ones. This also connects with messages on voting for policies this election, as Biden has committed to improving the ACA and Trump is in litigation to axe pre-existing conditions. And Miguel, please guess what this includes.
Oh, Lord, what?
COVID.
Jesus, with over 200,000 American deaths of the virus?
I don't understand.
Moving from election season to open enrollment season kind of reminds me of that Bugs Bunny episode where it's like rabbit season one second and duck season the next. In all seriousness, though, based on conversations we've seen on Reddit, there's an opportunity to plug content in the current knowledge gap on open enrollment season. With that, let's move on to our last segment, On the Radar.
Conversations on the election will take a wider turn as we shift focus towards post-election and the interregnum and how Florida's state of electors fit into the equation.
The what now?
Child, the interregnum. It took a lot of practice for me to be able to pronounce that correctly. A lot of practice. It's the period between November 4th and Inauguration Day where the transfer of power happens and where electors cast their final votes. The primary frames we're seeing moving for this period are fear of Trump's false narratives on election fraud taking hold, Trump refusing to transfer power if Biden wins, the narrative that democracy is worth waiting for, and we must give election officials ample time to count every ballot to ensure every voter's voice counts.
Right, because we know November 3rd isn't really the end, and what could happen after Election Day may actually be the most important part of this election. We'll definitely continue to monitor stories and messages and conversations about the Electoral College and progressive spaces, election defense, and voter protection efforts from across the country. All right, Renee, we're officially 7 days away from the election. How are you feeling?
Miguel, honestly, it depends on when you ask me. 1 minute, I'm feeling super hopeful and excited, and the next, I'm nervous AF. Check in with me about this on tomorrow's episodes, and I may have a different answer.
Fair enough. I'll definitely check in on you tomorrow as well with our audience as well.
Perfect.
All right, so that does it for us this morning. Thank you all for tuning into Signals in the Noise, and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.